Hi there, I'm Lamont. Um, I'm a Archmage on the Astral Discord. Been working with Astral for a number of years now, producing games. And I think I've got more use out of triggers than anyone else. So I'm going to be showing you how I created a guide page in the Siege of Khaldun that Sketch released recently for everyone on Astral. There have been a lot of requests for tutorials on how to use triggers, and recently on the Discord we've had requests on how we created these guides. So I'm going to show you how that was done. After that, I'm going to show you some of the other tricks you can do with triggers, such as pausing or playing audio, and then even moving images around the page, although that is a bit of a advanced project. So to get started, I'm going to start with just blank page, enter into edit mode. Now most of the guides on Astral were done using text in Astral, such as the tutorials. I use a bit of a cheat. I actually produce my pages of text in the image editor so that I can spell check and make sure alignment's correct. Now the first thing you'll notice here is we've got our cover image, the audio track using location audio, so it can be managed using triggers. It covers the entire surface, so if the player character anywhere on the map or on the cover, they'll hear the audio. So hide that again. You'll notice that I turned on grid snapping. It just makes it easier to line up triggers and things later on. Got the guide base image in place now. You'll notice that I've got the X for closing the page in the top right corner built into the image. This way I don't have to worry about grouping extra images together to make close button. You'll see the reset button is not here. That's on the individual pages as well, because only after page 1 do you need to reset. Also, the page switching buttons I've got integrated into the images. If you're going to be using your own images for those arrows or whatever you want to use, the process will be exactly the same, except that you'll position those now before you get on to the next step. I'm going to lock this page so I don't accidentally move it around. And now I'm going to load one of those text pages that's got both forward and backwards arrows, rather than the page 1, which has only got the forward arrow, because I want to see where all my triggers need to be. And using page snapping, everything just drops right into place. Now I'm not going to keep this page in the list here. I'm going to be creating groups for each page, because triggers can target groups rather than just individual layers. So for now, I'm just going to lock that layer so I don't edit it. And I'm going to position triggers. Yeah, it doesn't quite match up with my triggers where I want my triggers there. So I'm going to disable grid snapping by pressing Ctrl D. Place my trigger directly over that image. See the trigger name is new trigger. I'm going to place another trigger over the back button. Now it gets confusing because that's also named new trigger. So I'm going to select one and just rename it so I know which trigger I'm dealing with. Next trigger, save it, edit that one, back trigger, save. Now you'll notice that in the guide, you don't actually see the glow of the triggers. They're invisible. That's done quite easily. You select the trigger and change its opacity to 0. It's not visible, but it will still work. If you hide the trigger, it won't work. Okay, so now I've got that trigger in the right position. I'm going to lock it. I just want to check its height, minus 82, because I want the back trigger at the same height. Okay, perfect. So I'll make that opacity 0. And lock it. You'll notice I didn't change any of the other trigger settings, although I should. I don't need to change the color setting because making it opaque. Make it translucent, you're hiding it, the opacity of 0. I don't need to change the trigger icon because they can't be seen anyway. But I don't want the GM to be prompted every time they try and click on the trigger. So we're going to change that to GM no prompt. If you change this to only GM activates, then only the GM can see the trigger and click on it, but it will pop up a confirmation dialog. Players prompt GM, players can see and click on the trigger, but the GM gets a prompt to say, okay, I'll allow it or not. Anyone can activate. All players and the GM can see the triggers and can click on them without a confirmation. GM no prompt. Oh, my apologies. Players prompt GM. That's the GM needs to confirm it. Anyone can activate. The players can confirm their own click. GM no prompt. The GM sees the trigger and can activate it, but it won't get prompted. And anyone no prompt, GM or players can click the trigger without being prompted. In this case, we only want the GM to be able to access it and click on it. So we'll save that. Next step, we need a trigger for the reset guide. So we're going to place one right there. Change that trigger's name to reset guide trigger. GM no prompt. Save it and change the opacity to 0. We're going to worry about the order now because we're going to be grouping triggers. And we're going to place one for closing the guide. Let's resize this trigger because we don't want accidentally be clicked. So let's make it about the size of the X itself. That should give enough bordering just in case. Change that to 0 and make it GM no prompt and rename it close guide. Notice I'm leaving the word trigger in so that when you're looking at the layer list, it's easy to tell what items are triggers and what aren't. Lock that one. Just change this back to 100% clear so we can resize that as well. Go. Change that back to 0 and lock it. And now we don't need this page anymore because we've positioned everything. So I'm going to remove it for now. The triggers are all still in place. Now the close guard trigger is always going to be available. So we're going to select that, move it above the guard base, hold Control and click on the second layer we want to group with it. Yeah, you can click on this button to group layers, or just press Control G or Command G on a Mac to make a group. So this is going to be my guide group. Lock that. Now remember, that guide group has got the close trigger built in over the corner. As you can see, if I move over the corners here, those triggers are still available even though I haven't got any pages set up. Minimize that group again. Now the reset guide group, a guide trigger, I'm actually going to add in here as well. Because even though it's useless on the first page, clicking it while you're on the first page isn't going to do anything. It's just going to take you back to the first page. So keeping it with that group and not hiding it at any point, disabling it at any point makes sense. We're just going to remove the label for the reset guide from the first page because the image for that page doesn't include the label. Now here's the trick I use for creating multiple pages. You're going to select both the next and back triggers. You group that and name the group page X group. When you're renaming a group, always hit the enter key when you're done typing, otherwise it won't save the name. So now I've got a group there that I can just copy multiple times for each page I add to the guide. And for the first page, I'll delete the back trigger. For the last page, I'll delete the next trigger. But in general, all those are in the right place now, so it's a good place to start. Because we don't want those triggers active by default, we're going to hide the page, and now you'll see the triggers don't activate. Come on, click on them. Now I'm going to lock the layer because I don't want to accidentally move it either. Although when the layer is hidden, it's almost impossible to move it without going in and changing settings. Now if we go to my assets and D&D 5e games, Siege of Khaldun, I can see here I've got a folder for each map in the game, and we're working on the lobby now. So I've got 7 pages in total from this. I'm not going to do all of them, but I'll give you an example. I'm going to do 2 or 3 pages. So I'm going to select the group, Control C, copy to clipboard, in the bottom right corner there, and then Control V to create a new copy. Change this page name to page 1 group, move that 1 and hit enter to save that change. Now I'm going to make it visible and open it up. Again, now we don't need the back trigger, so I'm going to unlock that. You'll see it automatically highlights the area, and I can press delete to delete that. If you want to add information, pages or assets into a group, easiest way is to select one of the layers in that group currently, otherwise it becomes a bit of a nightmare to try and reorganize. If I go any further, I want to switch grid snapping back on. So I clicked on the map first just to make sure that it will activate. The start of the trigger we're going to change now anyway, so we won't bother with that yet. We're just going to place the page 1 image in place and lock it. Now before we can set up what this trigger does, we need to create a target for it. So we're going to need to create a new page. So top again, Control C, Control V to create a new group. Name that group 2, copy 1, and enter to save. Now you'll see the page group 2 is hidden. So now we're going to make this trigger hide page group 1, so it'll hide the triggers and the page image, and then show that entire group, which will be both triggers and then the page to image once we add that. There is a little bug in Astral at the moment that a trigger cannot target a group that it is part of. So to be able to target page group 1, we're going to drag the trigger out of the group. And once we've made all the settings changes, we can put it back in the group and it will work properly. So we can go to the trigger settings. This is going to be page 1's next trigger. That's going to target 2 groups. So we can add 2 layers. We can make page 2 visible. And we're going to make page 1 hidden. Now, Astral will automatically preview what it's going to do when you're editing your layers. Once you've saved, it will revert. One thing to take note of is that if you're using a trigger to move an item around, so you're changing the, for instance, it's go, yeah, if we target this and we change the X or Y position or the height or width of that image, Astral will preview it correctly, but when you hit save, it won't always revert to the correct settings. So we're going to talk about that later on when I talk about moving images around and moving layers around on the map. So now we're going to go back to page group 1 and hide that and save the trigger. Now we can put the trigger back inside the group, and if we save the map now, saving, we can activate that trigger. Now, of course, we've got forward trigger here, which does absolutely nothing because we haven't set it up yet. We've got the back trigger here, which does absolutely nothing because we haven't set it up yet. So back into edit mode, we can minimize the page 1 group open up the page 2 group, and we're going to put in our page 2 image. So back to lobby, grab page 2, position it. I'm going to lock that down so don't accidentally move it. The back trigger. Now remember, the back trigger will need to hide the page 2 group and show the page 1 group. We can't target the group that the trigger is currently in, so we have to move the trigger out of the group. Trigger settings. This is going to be page 2's back trigger. I need to target 2 layers. So the page 2 group is going to be hidden, and the page 1 group is going to be shown. So now you can see Astral's preview shows you what the trigger is going to be doing. It doesn't matter what order you do these things in, because they happen in a single repaint on the screen anyway. I normally try and keep them in a logical order, just so I don't get confused, especially when I'm working with multiple layers, which happens often, especially like if the close button, you need to target every page as well as the guide itself, and the reset button needs to target every page. So keeping it in order makes it easier so that you don't lose track of where you are. And so you're going to save that trigger and put it back in there. And just for giggles, we're going to create page 3. For this, I'm going to use the image for the last page, page 7, just to give you an idea of what we can do. That group, we're going to just call it page 3 group, even though we're going to be using the last page of the actual guide for it. Edit the next page trigger, take it out of the group, edit it. This is page 2 next trigger. You'll notice that all the settings that I set for those original triggers before I added them in the group and then copied the group to make the new pages get retained. Always a good idea to set your color, your preferred trigger icon, and your access settings before making your copies. But don't add layers before adding your copies. It can cause all kinds of nonsense later down the line. Yes, this is page 2 next, so we're going to hide page 2 and we're going to show page 3. Save that, add it back into the group. Now to speed things along here, instead of saving the map and using the triggers to actually switch to the different guides, I'm just going to hide that group and show that group as if I'd already clicked on that trigger. Since we're going to be using the last page, we won't need a next trigger, so we can select that and remove it. Select a layer in the group to make it easier to add a new item to the group. Position and drop and lock it. Take the back trigger out of the group. Edit the settings. This is the page 3 back. Add 2 layers. We're going to target group 3, which we're going to hide, and we're going to target group 2, which we're going to show. Interesting trick. If you're trying to make a layer hidden that's already hidden, you can just toggle the setting and Astral will understand that it's meant to be that way. For instance, Okay, let's just save that, add it back to the group. So now let's make page 2 visible. Ignore the mess on the screen. This is just for reference here. I'm going to take this out there. Let's just remove those and save it. So now we've got a trigger that's not actually doing anything. Now remember, page 2 is already visible, but this back trigger is meant to make it visible. So add 2 layers, page 3 group, we're going to hide. Now page 2 is already visible, even though this trigger is meant to make it visible. As you can see, it's already visible. So if you hide the layer and then show it again, just making that change lets Astral know to save that change to your trigger. So now if I save the trigger, add it back to the group, and I'm going to hide that group 2 layer, and I'm going to save. Wait for it to finish saving, and now that back trigger correctly shows page 2. Right, next step is the reset guide. Now the reason I showed you that trick of toggling is because with the reset guide, I'd now either have to make all these pages visible, which is what I normally do because it's safer. At least you won't forget a step because you can see that there's something wrong on the screen. But the reset guide needs to hide page 3, page 2, and then show page 1. Now, because page 2 is already hidden, if I edited this targeted page 2 now, so again, target page 3, page 2, page 1. Page 3 we're going to hide. Page 2 is already hidden, but we need to make sure that the trigger will switch off the page if it's visible. So we make it visible and hide it again so that it's registered as a change. And then page 1 group we want visible, and save the trigger. Ooh. Yeah, Jim no prompt. Perfect. Now for the close guide group. Firstly, we're going to need a trigger to show the guide again once we're done. So below the, you need to create a new group. If your LA, as I showed you, if your layer in your group is selected, or if the group itself is selected, when you create a new asset or import an asset, it will add it to that group. Since we don't want to do that, we're going to select cover, text, and I'm just going to drop a label here. Show typing, show guide. Lock that. We're going to add a trigger over it. Resize that trigger. Lock in position. Now in this case, I don't want the GM to be able to just click on it and show the guide, because the players might be watching the screen and we want to give them hints. So only GM activate is the one I want, because it will prompt the GM if he accidentally clicks it. You need to hide the symbols so that you can read the text below it, and I'm going to leave the color there so that it's visible that it's a trigger on the map. We're going to call this the show guide trigger and save. Now we're going to group the text and the trigger for the show guide group, lock the entire group and hide it. Back in the guide group, the close guard trigger. In this case, we wanted to hide all the pages, no matter what their state is. So I'm just going to make them all visible so that you don't have to toggle each setting. Because this guard trigger targets the guard group, we have to take it outside of the group before we can edit it. So now we've got 3 pages plus the guard group plus the show guide group that we need to change the state of. So starting at the top, page 3 is going to be hidden, page 2 hidden, page 1 hidden, the guide group hidden, and show guide group we can make visible. Save that trigger, add the close guide trigger back into the guide group, minimize that, and save. And now, ta-da! I had to wait for it to save. There we go. And what happened there was that my machine saw that the trigger was pressed and hid the guide, show guide trigger, but the server still knew the old state hadn't received the hide command yet, so it swapped back when it did an update. Now, of course, the show guide trigger doesn't actually do anything except ask for confirmation because we haven't set it up yet. So back into edit. The show guide trigger, of course, is going to have to target the show guide group. So we're going to take it out of the group. We're going to need to show hide the show guide group. So that's one layer. We need to show the guide group, 2 layers, and we need to show page 1. Otherwise, people are going to be staring at a blank page. So first steps is the show guide group is going to be hidden. You'll notice the trigger is still visible because we took it outside of that group. But as soon as we put it back in the group, it will work correctly. Then we're going to show the guide group, and we're going to show page 1 group. Now remember, as soon as we show the page 1 group, it automatically enables the triggers for that page as well because it's in the group. So we're going to save that trigger, add it back into the group. Now we save the map, wait for it to save, and show guide, ask for confirmation, and there we go. Now if I go to any page other than page 1, we've got that reset guide label. We click on that to return to page 1. We can page backwards and forwards through our guide, and of course we can hide the guide. But now, what if you wanted to do something different? We're going to make this guide page not all the items because that's a lot of programming. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete all these pages. I just want the guide group. I'm not even going to bother with the show guide group. Actually, let's use that button. We're going to make the show guide group button move the guide image. So I'm going to select all those layers and delete them. I'm not going to be bothering with those at the moment. Now, you can't use a trigger to move an entire group. You have to move each layer. So what I'm going to show you now, you're going to have to repeat for each item that you want to move, each individual layer. We're only going to be working with the guide base, so I'm going to take that out of the group. I I'm going to unlock the group and just delete the whole thing. You'll see now the show guard trigger. If we click on it, all those layers that I've deleted are automatically removed from the trigger. I don't want that trigger to hide anymore, because I'm going to be using it to move the image. So let's change this name to move guide down trigger, and we're going to save that. Well, let's make it gem no prompt. Change that label to move guide. Now, because we aren't targeting this layer, we don't have to take the trigger out of the group before we edit it. Edit the trigger, we add layer, guide base. Now we want to move this image down. Now, as I said before, there is a bug that sometimes if you change this value, Astral doesn't remember what it was correctly after you saved the trigger, and will leave the image where you've moved it with the trigger. It won't reset to its original position. So if you're going to be moving things around your map with triggers, always save the information that you're going to be changing so that you can reset after you've saved. So I'm going to copy that Y value for now, and then I'm going to make that move down the page to, let's center it. Save the trigger. You see there, don't reset it. So go back, guide, select the value and reset it correctly. Now that value there, you'll also need for when you want to move it back. So we're going to create a new trigger, place it over the previous one, and we're going to use that trigger to reset the position. So let's edit that. We're going to call that reset position trigger. We don't need a prompt for it. I'm going to leave the symbol there so that we know which layer is which. I'm going to save that and lock it and hide it for now. The move guide trigger, we're now going to make hide itself and show the reset trigger. So the move guide down trigger is going to be hidden so that we can't activate it twice. And we're going to show the reset guide trigger. Notice the little star symbol there so that we know that it's the reset trigger. Now normally I would use two groups for this, one to move down with its own text and own trigger, but in this case we're just doing this quick and dirty to show you what's possible with triggers. So let's save that and move the guide. I've got the wrong trigger showing. I forgot it. Got to reset that. Save. Move. Why isn't it moving? What have I done wrong now? Bug hunting. Let's make that 0. Save. Now there, bounce back correctly. Save like that. Whatever triggers on top is the one that will activate, unless it's hidden, in which case it passes through. Okay, so we save, move guide. There we go. And now we've got the reset trigger active. So we can edit the reset trigger. We're going to move the guide back. We're going to hide the reset trigger, and we're going to show the move trigger. So we're going to the guide base. We're going to paste in that value. The reset trigger is going to be hidden, and the move guide trigger is going to be made visible. Save that. Now you notice it didn't save, it didn't revert again. But that's okay in this case because we've put it back where we wanted it. So save. Use the reset card just to switch the triggers. Moved it. Now the reset card trigger is selected, and we can bounce images around the screen like this. Now I've used this trick in the past to create puzzles that are interactive. Quite fun. Last thing I want to show you is playing with media files. Now we've got this audio playing, so we're going to create a group to pause the audio and then to play it again. So just going to drop texture to pause audio, lock that so I don't accidentally move it. Immediately over that, I'm going to create a second label, play audio, lock that so I don't accidentally delete it. Over the pause audio, I'm going to create a trigger, select it, lock it, edit it, no prompt. This is pause audio trigger. Don't want a symbol on it, so I'm going to save that. And now instead of creating a new trigger, I'm just going to copy and paste that pause audio trigger right above the play audio and rename it play audio trigger and save. Now I'm going to group the pause audio and rename that pause group. Lock the entire group. Play audio, I'm going to group, call that the play group, lock that, and then hide it. Now we know the audio is currently playing, so pause is what should be active. Because we're going to use this pause audio trigger to also show play group and hide the pause group, we have to take it out of the group when we edit it. First things first, we're going to hide the group it's in. We're going to show the other group, and we need to edit the audio. So the play group is going to become visible. Pause group is going to become invisible, and the audio is going to be paused. Save that trigger and add it back into the group. Now I'm going to do the shortcut I showed you earlier, although I would suggest saving every time you've created a group like this and testing first can save you a ton of trouble later on. Take the audio trigger out of the group because we need to edit, target the group that it's in. You can add 3 layers again for the play group, which is now going to be hidden. The pause group, which will be made visible, and the drums. Now, this button is supposed to be playing the audio, but it's currently playing. So again, as with the hidden states, we can toggle that so that Astral knows to change the state to play no matter what it currently is. And save that trigger, add it back to the group. Now I can hide that group, show the pause group, and save. Now, just to make this visible, because I'm not sure if you can actually hear the music, I'm going to unhide that group. So you can see there's the pause symbol. If I click this button now though, it's paused. Now I can play it. And if I click the button again, it'll allow me to pause it. And that's the basic guide for triggers. I hope that helps whoever needs it. Have fun with Astral.